Hello and welcome to today's workshop, Effective Recruitment and Retention, Attracting and Keeping Staff and Volunteer Talent. For those of you that I haven't met yet, my name is Lynn Gidluck with the Community Engagement and Research Center at the University of Regina. I'm so glad that you could join us today for the final session in our Spring 2022 Nonprofit Management Essentials Toolkit series. The Community Engagement and Research Center is pleased to offer these workshops in partnership with the South Saskatchewan Community Foundation. Karen Henders, who sadly for us, but very excitingly for her, will be retiring from the Community Foundation this month, is joining us today. Karen, I hope you feel the collective love and appreciation coming your way for all the work you've done for the community. Our community, through your work, not just with the South Saskatchewan Community Foundation, but throughout your entire career. We wish you all the very best in what folks, Karen and Sherry and I were talking just a few minutes ago. And rather than use the word retirement, we're going to use the Karen's phrase from now, her work optional phase. I just love that. That's great. I'm going to definitely tell that to everyone I know who's kind of in your situation, Karen, and wish you all the very best for everything that you do in the future. Well, it's such a beautiful day in Treaty 4 territory. If you're like me, you're itching to get back outside to dig in the dirt. I'm feeling a lot of aches and pains from digging too many dandelions. I think I even got carpal tunnel syndrome from, or start of it from that, and getting the soil ready to transplant perennials. Anyways, I'm so glad you resisted the temptation, the urge to be outside and decided to join us today for another riveting session, I'm sure, with Sherry Hildred. I'd just like to acknowledge how happy I am to live, work, and garden on the traditional land of the Nehawa, Anasinapek, Nakota, Dakota, and Lakota First Nations and the homeland of the Métis. If you registered for the workshop, you should have received an email from me earlier this morning with the slide deck that Sherry is going to use today. If you joined at the last minute after seeing the email I sent out this morning to the university community, please leave your email address in the chat box so that I can add you to the list of people to send the toolkit handouts that Sherry's going to share with us and refer to during the session this morning. This email, along with a link to the recording, will be sent out before I leave at the end of the day today. So planning is underway for the fall toolkit workshops. If you have any great ideas for training sessions, please let me know. Also, for those of you who are interested in strategies, policies, or leadership necessary to make your workplaces more welcoming for members of the LGBTQ2S+ communities, there's a workshop starting right after this one on Zoom, offered by my colleagues at the Johnson Shoyama Graduate School. I should have sent this out to you last week, but I was in Vancouver for a conference, so my apologies for that short notice. But if any of you would like information on that topic, even if you sign up, I know like us, they will send the recording out. So I'll post that registration link in the chat shortly. So without further ado, I'm now very pleased to turn the floor over to Sherry Hildred with Belmore Consulting. In case any of you are joining us for the first time, I'll pop her biography in the chat box in case you didn't see the marketing material that we sent out. So take it away, Sherry.
Great. Thanks so very much, Lynn. And again, thanks so much, Lynn, for the opportunity to deliver the workshop series. Very nice to see some returning folks in the room. I recognize some names from our last two sessions and some new names as well. So welcome to new folks. Even though this is a workshop series, each one of these workshops is also standalone. So again, really excited to get into the content for today, which is going to focus on effective recruitment and retention. Also want to say a huge note of thanks to South Sask's Community Foundation, particularly to Karen, and of course, all the very, very best in the work optional phase of upcoming phase for you, Karen. It's been a real pleasure to work together. Folks, what I'm going to do is pop over to my shared screen. I'm going to bring up the slide deck that we're going to navigate through today, the same one that Lynn would have shared with you earlier this morning. We have quite a bit of content to get through relative to effective recruitment and retention. And think of this as sort of the fundamentals. We're going to hit sort of the main areas that need to be considered with some very special focus on what it means to look at culture within an organization and how very important that is when we talk about culture and values as a precursor to the important work of really doing effective recruitment and retention. The other precursor I just wanted to give folks is that when we're looking at effective recruitment and retention, I'm often going to use the language, what employees or staff, but that is absolutely interchangeable with volunteers. So I want you to very quickly establish a lens whereby everything that we're going to consider, even if I'm only talking about employees or staff, I want you to think of that as interchangeable, because the very best practices for volunteer recruitment, retention, volunteer management programs absolutely replicate those very same best practices that we use with hiring staff. So just want to put a little bit of a proviso on that. The final item, of course, please do put any questions that you may have into the chat. I know both Lynn and Karen, for the time that she's available to stay on the call, are going to sort of moderate the chat for me. So we'll make sure that any questions that you may have, if we don't get to them throughout the session, we'll certainly cover any questions at the end of the session. So with that, folks, just bear with me here as I bring up the shared screen, the PowerPoint we're going to go through today. And in just a moment, you should be having a single full slide deck or single slide rather pop up onto the screen, and just let me swap over to the appropriate view. So there you go, folks. You should have a single slide up on the screen now, the opening page with today's management essentials, and again, focusing in on effective recruitment and retention. So as we get into this material, as I say, folks, with each and every one of these workshops, there is a huge opportunity here, not just in examining and looking at best practices, but also looking at what you're already doing in each of your own respective organizations. So this is never about reinventing the wheel, regardless of the subject matter we're looking at. And the same is true with effective recruitment and retention. You could have some really solid practices or best practices in place today. Perhaps we're going to expand that knowledge or reorganize some of these considerations when we talk about effective recruitment and retention. So again, it's a real opportunity to look at, well, what are some of those best practices? What are some maybe unique considerations that you haven't thought of? And could those be embedded into your already existing practices? As I say with each and every workshop, folks, you are welcome at any time beyond the workshop to reach out to me directly. As I say, we have fairly heavy content for the next couple of hours today. I will make sure we preserve some time for question and answer, but very often what I find is that folks, once they have time away from the workshop, they start digesting the material, and most importantly, start implementing some of the key tools that I'm going to be sharing with you today, that we're going to cover today, and that Lynn will actually be sending out to folks after the workshop. So actual working documents and templates. Very often what I find is once folks start working with them, that's where you'll end up having questions. And so again, please know, and I certainly invite you, you are not limited to just asking questions here in the workshop. I am more than happy to respond to emails, have conversations offline if there are some unique circumstances or particular things that you wanted to dive into a bit further. So again, please don't hesitate to reach out. With respect to our session outline today, so as I say, we've got about 2 hours together. We'll preserve some time at the end for question and answer, and certainly any other dialogue and engagement. So a real opportunity to connect, ask questions. There's no silly questions at all. Happy to go through those. And as I say, absolutely welcome to reach out to me offline as well. What I have for you here are just a number of the seminar references that I've used in the development of these materials or this workshop today. So always want to give credit where credit is due. And often, folks, I will include the reference for the materials directly on the slide. So if those materials aren't referenced here, they'll often be referenced on individual slides. So I just wanted to give note to some of those resources that I've utilized in the development of this particular session. I also just wanted to flag, there are a number of organizations that I have worked with, continue to work with, various clients, organizations in different capacities over the years and currently. And so just know whether you are a small organization or a larger organization, and for those of you that have sat in on the last couple of webinars, we talked about, or last couple of workshops, we've talked about, to what degree do we have policy governance in our organization, so a board of directors and staff versus organizations that are more heavily reliant on volunteers. So again, regardless of the size of the organization or the particular sector that the organization is in, all of these approaches that we're going to look at are best practices with recruitment and attention. They are scalable. So don't think, even when we're looking at the tools, oh, that's just too robust of a tool for my organization. They are scalable. They can apply to organizations of all sizes. So I've just given you a bit of a sample here of some of the related community engagement and organizations I've worked with, whether we're talking about strategy and strategic planning, organizational redesign, or actually doing recruitment activities. So for the session, folks, main areas I want to dig into are related to the importance of corporate culture. This is something that most organizations, because let's face it, we're busy. We're running organizations, we're trying to start new programs, we're delivering services, we're applying for grants, we're trying to do funder reporting, we're trying to get our audits done at our year end and our AGMs. It's busy, we know this. Very often what happens in nonprofits is there's a urge when we have to bring in new staff, so we maybe have turnover, or we're looking to bring in volunteers, there is an urge to just want to fill that gap very quickly. And what I find is that when organizations don't take the time to actually build a recruitment strategy, there is much more of a risk that you're going to be bringing in individuals just, sort of like at the Oscars. These are placeholders, folks. These aren't maybe necessarily the best individuals for the work or staff work or volunteer work. And we can really offset this risk, not just by resisting the urge to very quickly fill that position, but we can offset this risk by spending a little bit of time and attention on this idea of corporate culture and the link between culture in our organization and the values of our organization, and how that actually significantly matters when we talk about employee attraction and retention. And we'll get into some of that, of course, throughout this workshop. As I say, we've got very unique challenges, but we also have some very unique opportunities. So every labor market circumstance provides challenges and provides opportunities. So I want to look at some of those relative to the best practices around recruitment. So again, some of these pieces, even the tools that I'll share with you, the templates, may be more familiar. And for others, this may be a tool that you haven't used before. So again, I've sort of selected my top 6. If I had these tools when I first started in the nonprofit sector myself, they would have made a huge difference when it comes to HR matters. So again, I've included those in the realm of best practices. Want to look at this idea of how do we align for retention success? So it's much bigger than just the job that needs to be done and the performance of that work. So how do we really align ourselves for retention success? And you will very quickly see that there are links or loops back to this idea of corporate culture and values of the organization. As I say, folks, we're not reinventing the wheel. I want to, build on the knowledge you already have. There's a breadth and depth of experience in this Zoom meeting today, Zoom session today. So we want to leverage that and maybe expand on it. And as I say, the tools that we'll be looking at applicable to both large and small organizations. Want to just spend a quick moment here when we talk about, well, why does all of this matter when it comes to effective recruitment and retention? The idea that, why do we sort of have to get off the hamster wheel? Why do we need to take sort of a beat or take a breath and think about maybe some other aspects of our organization? I wanted to share a few facts with you. These came out of a survey that I recently looked at. It's an organization called Leading Resources, Inc., and they do it's a consulting firm that does a number of different survey activities to really analyze organizations and help build tools to support higher performing organizations. This is some of the data, and I've got a few other facts from their recent surveys. 22% of staff turnover occurs in the first 45 days. 40%, that's pretty high, of senior managers will fail within the first 18 months. 60% of organizations, despite all of the best practices we're going to look at today, fail to set goals for new hires. And again, remember, every time I'm talking about staff or hires, employees, use this interchangeably with volunteers. Ultimately, the best volunteer management model is going to be one that replicates and treats our volunteers no different than how we treat our staff. And that's in all aspects of operations. Cost of losing an employee is estimated at a little bit of sticker shock here, perhaps 3 times their annual salary. So think about that. If you are looking at 22% of staff leaving, so you've made that investment, you've done, the job posting, you've accepted the applications, you've screened them, all the things we're going to talk about today, you've done the interviews, you've onboarded, or maybe what you think you've done to onboard, and we'll talk about what onboarding really is. You do all of that work, and 45 days later, you lose that individual, or in the case of senior managers, within the first 18 months. So when we take sort of that combined consideration, it will be approximately 3 times the annual salary. So think about that relative to the impact and why it matters to really get effective recruitment and retention right. The other piece that I want to flag for you at the bottom of the screen, another statistic, 69% of employees are more likely to stay with an organization if they experienced really great onboarding. So again, as we go through the materials today, I'm going to talk about, what are the attributes and the characteristics of onboarding. Individuals tend to think this is a one-time activity that happens on the first day, or maybe in the first week of employment, or bringing a volunteer into the organization, when in fact onboarding itself will span the first 12 months if it's done properly. So we want to look at some of the best practices around continued onboarding, not just a singular or sole exercise that we complete once. Other information I wanted to share with you relative to, well, why are employees leaving? What does that look like? Some of the top pieces that were outlined in these most recent survey results, fairness and a positive atmosphere were absent or lacking in the organization. Feedback, autonomy, involvement in decisions was lacking. So again, where individuals don't feel an attachment to the organization. Folks will remember, if you've attended the last couple of sessions, we talked about employees understanding, everyone in the organization, every volunteer, understanding how what they do every day supports those strategic objectives of the organization, how they add value. So again, if there's a perception that there isn't an involvement in decision-making, lack of rewards, benefits, recognition also cited. And where there were high instances of stress or supply and demand. So thinking about the labor market and job availability, how much competition in the marketplace. So what can you do as an organization, as a nonprofit, to set yourself apart? And we want to talk about some of those pieces as well. So again, the true cost of employee turnover, there are direct costs, which we've talked about. Indirect costs, think of a manager you bring in and 12 months later, all of that investment in training and building capacity, even corporate knowledge and understanding, that goes out the door when they leave. Examining what those causes are for employee turnover, and then creating a plan to address those. part of the work around really understanding organization, and we'll cover this towards the end of the workshop, but the idea of doing an annual employee survey. And again, where I say employees, we would include our volunteers. And I've actually included a little bit of an example for you later. So how do we get at some of those causes? If we can hear from employees in a very anonymous way and honest way, to understand what the causes are, we can start working on a plan to correct them. The other one piece of information I want to share with you, it is at the bottom of the screen. This comes from Future Workplace and Chronos, just another reference I looked at. 87% of employers said that improving retention is a critical priority for their organization. 87%. So we're talking about it, we're identifying it as a priority, but are we doing anything about it, or are we just staying on that hamster wheel and seeing this continual cycle of turnover? So I'd like to break it down and look at this idea of starting with the organization and the importance of individuals aligning or seeing their own values within the organization. So think about alignment of values. This particular component around values is the single number one reason why employees will be drawn to an organization and will actually stay with the organization. So I want to talk a bit about this idea of corporate culture. And again, I've included some statistics here for you, just interesting sort of assessment, again, recent survey results, and this idea of defining culture in the organization. So as you can see here, nearly 2/3 of employees say their company does not have a strong work culture. And what does that mean? What do we mean when we say culture? How do we define culture? We're going to get into that. Part of the way that we can address understanding our current culture, or thinking about what would our aspirational cultural environment look like in the organization, is considering some of the components of our vision, our mission, and the cultural values of the organization. So think about values as, you know, these shared norms very often, the things that matter most and guide us in our decision-making as we're carrying out our work. So where we have less than half of employees knowing their organization's mission, vision, and values, that's significant. If this idea of corporate culture and alignment of values is actually so important, and statistically we know it is when it comes to attraction and retention, we need to be doing a better job. So again, that can come in the form of icebreaker informational pieces at staff meetings, sharing what's in the strategic plan, explaining what a strategic plan is. When a strategic plan is being refreshed, making sure that we're including employees and volunteers, that we're consulting with them, that we're talking, it is board work, we know that, but we need those consultations and input from employees as well, and volunteers. 70% of employees credit their peers for making their job fun. So again, do we have an enjoyable, fun work environment? Is there camaraderie? Is there collaboration? How do we work to create that type of environment? And again, workplace culture being one of the top correlated factors in employee happiness. And of course, happy employees much more likely to stay with the organization. So when we look at this idea of defining culture in an organization, think about sort of the social order of the organization, what shapes attitudes, behaviors. These are very wide-ranging topical areas. What are the norms within the organization? What's encouraged? What's discouraged? What's accepted? What's rejected within a group of individuals? And again, as we look at organizations and break down those components, particularly around not so much the mission and the vision, and those are all things that every employee should know, but I want to take a little bit of a closer look at this idea of values. So as we start to establish or think about values, so when boards of directors are doing this work within the strategic plan, we ask some very specific questions and we have to dive pretty deep. So the idea of values is that we will have a belief in an organization. So, the belief in the work that we're doing is making a difference. And through that belief, we have values that we hold closest to us. So those could be values around community service, around community engagement, transparent, accountable operations, doing our work in an honest way. There are a number of different pieces of language that will sort of flesh out when we're doing this values work, particularly with boards of directors, and of course, in consultation with staff and volunteers. Ultimately, I want you to think about values through the context or the lens of being guiding principles. So helping us in our decision making, and values should help individuals at all levels of the organization and assist them in making the best decisions as they're carrying out their work. So as they're working with clients or consumers, funders, other stakeholders to the organization. So when we look at values, I just wanted to give you a sense here, folks, and then tie this back to how we apply it to recruitment and retention. There's a couple of value statements I pulled, and I just pulled these as a matter of example from the nonprofit sector. And then there's a couple of others I wanted to share with you. I pulled one of the United Way value statements. So as you can see here, with some of the better value statements, it's not just identifying the word of service or trust or transparency or accountability. We actually define that. So we actually create a definition around our values. So as you can see here for the United Way, with their service value, they go on to talk about, we are motivated by a strong commitment to service to our donors, our neighbors, and our region. Our achievements are defined by the collective success of the communities we serve. So think about even just that single value statement, and when we're doing, and it can be infused into job advertisements, into job descriptions, of course, themselves, but even into the interview activities. So the opportunity to really share with candidates that you've screened, that you want to talk with further around who we are and what motivates us. What does that look like as an organization? So I wanted to share with you the United Ways because it's just such a really strong and powerful set of language around service. This is what motivates us. This is what we are doing each and every day. We are looking for individuals to join our team that have that matching value around strong commitment to service. So you start to see where those linkages are. I also included, just pulled one of the value statements from the Project Management Institute, which is an institute that I belong to as a designated project manager. And in our value statement, we talk about engagement and encouraging diverse viewpoints and enabling individuals to contribute to the project management profession and to the institute itself. So we recognize as times change and that industries grow and thrive or struggle, we have core values as project managers that give us a moral compass in how we're going to engage with our clients and our stakeholders, how we're going to communicate. And that belief guides our behavior in really providing ethical project management services. So again, a couple of examples. If we sort of go a little bit broader, I wanted to share with you a few other larger organizations that I'm sure you're most familiar with. One, of course, being Google. So you can see that Google has core values very specific to their organization, and it would stand to reason that individuals coming in to work with that organization need to align with those values. So there has to be an attachment. Where we have that alignment of values, we know that those individuals are a better fit for an organization, that they will actually stay longer with the organization. A couple of other organizations I wanted to share with you, Microsoft as well as KPMG. So again, KPMG's values I thought were very well articulated. Not only are they stated, and they do in fact have definitions in behind them. So what does it mean when we say we lead by example, we work together? So they have definitions that further demonstrate their values. However, I love their Coles Notes version because it immediately establishes the culture of team. We respect the individual. We seek the facts and provide insight. So again, there are some really unique ways that we can approach this idea when we talk about, well, what is corporate culture and how do we build it? This gives you a little bit of a sense of different approaches that different organizations take. With Google, again, the idea of fun and freedom, openness, general ethics, corporate citizenship. So the things that matter, including avoiding micro management of any employee. And we'll talk about that as we move forward as well. So when we're looking at bringing together this idea of values, culture, and engagement, maybe not what you expected to hear at an effective recruitment and retention workshop. However, spend some time on this. Think about your organization. I've given you a little bit of an iceberg analogy here. And this is the idea that we have things that are very visible within our organization, things that we share, our vision, our mission, things that our values, our policies, for example, things that are very visible. But what really matters is what's happening below the surface of that iceberg. So the perceptions, our beliefs, not just what we state as a shared value, but do we deeply believe them and do we enact them every day? What are the shared assumptions in the organization or the working norms? What are the unwritten rules, the things that just become the way we behave and engage, the way we really get things done? So we can say we value team and collaboration, but do we really do that? And can we demonstrate how we do it? When we get into looking at job descriptions, job advertisements, for example, if we are saying things such as, we work hard, but we play hard, do you? Is it defensible? When you're sitting in the interview, can you give that candidate an example of how we work hard, but how we play hard, how we engage as a team together? So being very sort of critical and thoughtful about the language that is used in job advertisements, and then setting the stage as we're moving into that interview process. And again, we'll go through each sort of step by step. The other thing I wanted to sort of flag is there is a difference between culture and engagement. So I've given you a couple of comparatives. If you've just run down the left-hand side of the screen, for example, how we do things around here to execute our organizational strategy. So the culture, how we do things. The engagement is how individuals feel when they're doing the things that are expected of them to execute that strategy. So one is how we do things, but how do I feel about the way that we're doing things? So when I'm building out, for example, working with organizations to build out values, we don't do that in silo. We talk about beliefs. We also talk about ethics or rules or codes of conduct. And then how do we deliver on that? So what does it look like in practical application when I talk about, well, here's what I do, but here's how I feel about it when I do it? Do we have a gap there? Is there something we need to address? Again, if you look at employees' interactions, leadership, and organizational performance, we all have all kinds of tools and mechanisms, even within our strategic planning and our metrics and our performance measures, to look at employee interactions and our performance. But what about the engagement side, about individual satisfaction, their level of commitment, and their level of commitment and performance in the roles that they have? And how do we get there? And there are some very easy ways to get there in having a much better understanding. And we'll talk about some of those tools again as we move forward. Critical to all of this work around values, looking at culture, and before we get into sort of the mechanics, the actual tools, I also wanted to include a little bit of a reference here to leaders within organizations. So I believe that each and every one of us, regardless of our job title, we don't need to be an ED or a CEO or a manager of finance or a manager of community engagement or some other program. I believe each and every individual within the organization has and will demonstrate their leadership capacities. That being said, there are, denoted leaders, whether it's through the natural hierarchy of the organization. We know that leaders account for 70%, based on recent statistics, of variance in employee engagement. So that means there still is a role, a very important role for leaders at the top of the organization. One of my more favorite quotes recently, I wanted to share with you. This is Sundar Pichai at the bottom of the screen. Leadership is learning to let go and really empowering people at all levels of the organization and trusting them to do the right thing. That's the ideal. But to get there, to be able to empower, to be able to delegate, to be able to let go, to be able to trust and build those trust relationships, that takes time. And it also takes this cultivation of a relationship with employees. And that cultivation can start as early as that interview process. So again, I've outlined sort of a number of the different attributes when we talk about leaders, how they can make a difference. We talk about things such as leading by example. So not just, talking it, but walking the talk, and ultimately living the organization's values. So what does that mean when we're living the organization's values? That is where each and every one of us in an organization, beyond the title that we hold, really can live those values. So even for, colleagues, you're bringing in a new employee, and colleagues that work in the same type of job function, they have the opportunity to be the leaders, demonstrate how they live the values of the organization. They're only going to do that if they themselves already have that tight engagement or alignment to the organization. So this idea of culture logic, Jim Collins, in one of the books that I referenced at the beginning of this session, the book is entitled Good to Great. So Jim Collins talks about, good is the enemy of great. What is getting in the way of organizations being great? And when we bring in the right people and they live the values of the organization, they become leaders, regardless of their job title. And he sort of refers to this as the flywheel effect. So the idea that individuals that are living the values of the organization, when new individuals come in, they're seeing this immediately. They're being immersed into the culture of the organization, which is all about that commitment to blank, whatever it is, commitment to service, commitment to various aspects of the role. So it becomes almost contagious. And he refers to this as a flywheel effect. And this is where you are going to see organizations that are just firing on all cylinders. It's healthy, it's dynamic, it's an engaging work environment. You have longer term retention of employees, you have employee engagement. There's genuine and authentic enjoyment in doing the work they do and working within the organization. So think of this idea with the culture logic as being a little bit of a flywheel effect. And again, as referenced by Jim Collins in his book. One worth reading, by the way, folks, out of all of the literature that I share in the various workshops, Jim Collins' book is one that might be worth a read. A lot of really great concepts related to taking organizations from being good to really being great. So again, one thought for the day I want you to take away is related to values and this strong link between organizations, attraction, retention, financial performance, related to the alignment of the organization's values and the employees' perception of those values, that they're not just a poster on the wall. It really is what each of us do each and every day. One of the other items here, this just again, as noted at the bottom of the screen, came from Jim Collins. Companies that consistently focused on building strong corporate cultures over a period of several decades outperformed companies that did not by a factor of 6. And for for-profit companies, outperformed the general stock market by a factor of 15. So just significant return on the investment of taking the time to really get it right when we're talking about recruitment and retention. Values, culture, that's just one piece. It's often the piece that's overlooked. I do want to get into a little bit more of the tangibles. So what are organizations looking for? How has that changed? And this next piece that I'm going to cover, folks, this is about really blowing the dust off of your job descriptions and your job advertisements. Are you thinking very closely and carefully around what is changing in your enterprise environment? So it could be your sector or the particular area of nonprofit that you're focused on. What has changed in your enterprise environment, in your sector? But also, what has changed, generally speaking? What are employers looking for? And are we taking the time to actually refresh our documentation? This is one of the major challenges, particularly in nonprofits, because you know what? We're busy. We're really busy. And the last thing on the bottom of the list that doesn't even exist is this idea of refreshing, well, our job description's up to date. Do we have the most sort of appropriate and current articulation of what a job requires when we're posting it? Are we really sharing what it is that we're looking for? Or are we just repurposing old documentation because we don't have time? So think about that, but also think about at a more macro level, what has changed? What are the skills that employers are looking for? This came from a Forbes analysis. They do this every year, pulling out the top 10 skills that are reported as desired by employers across North America. This is for-profit, nonprofit, it covers the gamut. I just want you to have a quick look, sort of scan through and look at what those top skills were in 2018. And then let's just jump forward to 2020, where as we were going through 2020, we all know what the world was going through and how the pandemic was starting to impact us. Look at where data literacy, critical thinking, tech savvy, look at where they sit on the list. Maybe in comparison to having, some type of tech or data analysis type skill sets in 2018. And then jump forward even one more year to 2021, last year, and have a look at how that skill set that was most desired changed in 2021. So a growth mindset, commitment to continuous learning. Could that have anything to do with the fact that there's more and more and more softwares and remote work tools and project management software tools and database to manage our donors and other philanthropy activities? Growth mindset, continuous learning, likely tied to the tech side. Critical thinking still sat up very high on the list. Number four, survival skills. I think that means something different to each and every one of us, and probably depending on what day of the week it is. Resiliency, curiosity, natural curiosity to ask the questions, kind of aligns with critical thinking. Flexibility, absolutely. We saw that adaptability and flexibility as well in 2020 start to creep up the top list. So again, don't just think about your organization, the job you need to get done. How has it changed? How did it change in 2020? How did it change or revert back to maybe pre-COVID processes in 2021? How has it changed or reverted back to pre-COVID processes in 2022? Are there any enduring changes? One of the organizations that I work with in my client portfolio, we made a conscious decision that we were not going to return to full pre-COVID processes where every employee was going to work in the office all the time. We made the decision in 2021 that we were going to adopt a permanent full-time blended work model where staff would work 60% in the office and 40% remotely. And this allowed us to create co-location workspaces in our facility, reduce our footprint, so reduce our lease costs as we were looking at a relocation at that time or had been in the midst of a relocation project, and also responded to what employees told us. So every year with this particular organization, I would do an employee survey in the fall and ask different questions, some similar questions, but ask different questions. I wanted to hear from them. Here we are, folks, in the midst of this pandemic. You've been working 100% remotely for how long? What do you want? What does the future look like? What should we be considering? What is realistic? What would support your job satisfaction? So based on a number of factors, including employee feedback, that decision was made. So again, having a look at the macro and the micro aspects of each and every position. As we're doing this work, folks, and again, I want to get into some of sort of the mechanics of recruitment and retention. Yes, it's an investment. Yes, it takes time. But again, hiring the right person will give you that return on investment. So whether it's better employees, better services, their own improved job satisfaction, a more motivated group of staff, reducing that turnover, in turn, reducing those direct and indirect costs, reducing absenteeism, reducing stress levels. So again, the quality of the people that you're going to bring into your organization and how you're going to retain them, they are the central focus. We are nothing in our organizations without the individuals that are delivering all of our programs and services. It is the lifeblood of what we do. It absolutely needs to be the one place where we take the time and make the investment to really get it right and look at some new strategies when it comes to effective recruitment and retention. And we will look at some of those as we move forward. Here's another fun fact, you guys: 160 hours per week, 52 hours of sleep, give or take for some of us on average, 116 waking hours. And we are spending 50 to 70% of our time preparing for work, actually doing the work, thinking about work, or with our coworkers. We are spending more time with those that we work with than our own family members. So it is our next family. It is our other family. It is worth making that investment and really getting it right. For any of you who have been through an example where one individual that isn't a right fit within the organization, very quickly how it can start to bring others in the organization down. So again, we want to be very, very careful in the hiring practices and thinking very closely and carefully about who we are as an organization. Or if we're not there yet and you don't have the corporate culture that you desire, how can we get you there? So what are the things that we can do to get that corporate culture and in turn attract the talent that you want, retain the talent that you want, and start to create that flywheel effect where it's like, this is, think about the publications that come out every year, the top 10 employers in Saskatchewan, the top 100 in Canada, to be an employer of choice. What does it take where people are desirous to come to you and be with your organization and to be known as, oh, that's a great place to work. So with our recruitment piece, I'm going to start with recruitment. The first piece, folks, is around having a recruitment strategy. Now, everywhere in this workshop where you see a red check mark, this is going to denote a specific tool, an actual template that I have provided to Lynn, and she's going to share with everyone after this workshop. So we actually have 6 tools in total. The first one that I find most often organizations don't have is an actual recruitment strategy template. So the items that I've listed here around best practices, I want to cover those. It starts with a strategy. So in the recruitment strategy template that I'm going to have Lynn share with you, it takes you through a number of different steps. So these might be things you're already doing, or you have your own standards in place. For example, when we talk about recruiting sources, so where potentially are you going to be recruiting from? Interview process, what the standard looks like in your organization. The offer process, what does that look like? Any other considerations around the actual recruitment activity, and then also assigning responsibility for that activity. So in this document or template, it is not all inclusive, but I've given some prompting ideas or other considerations that can really work well for nonprofits when we talk about, well, where are we going to recruit from? So, you may be using, Indeed, or you may be using Charity Village, which, by the way, I actually just posted a couple of jobs for one of my clients, one of my Pan-Canadian clients. It's really getting expensive. It was $287 for a nonprofit job. Volunteer postings are free still with Charity Village, but they're getting expensive. So again, we're making an investment, we're spending money. Let's really make sure we get this right. In addition to those very traditional talent egg, there's so many out there now, and different recruiting sites for different levels of expertise. So if you're looking for somebody, it's a 12-month contract. I need a senior research officer. I don't have time to train them. They need to have a level of expertise. They need to hit the ground running. There are job sites that are more specifically targeted to those that have experience versus something like Talent Egg, which is targeting more of, internships or graduates, recent graduates, for example. So those that are keen to get into the job market, but don't have a lot of practical experience. For any of you that are bringing on university students, either through summer jobs, Young Canada Works, different intern programs, practicums through the university. Again, remember, every one of those engagements is a potential individual for thinking about recruitment or the sources of recruitment in the future. So again, I've outlined a few for you, and for each and every one of these sections in the recruitment strategy, I've given a bit of an outline of things that you should be thinking about. And then at the very end, I've sort of summarized, it's maybe 15, 20 key recruiting activities, and then assigning who is responsible. So who actually is going to carry out each and every one of these steps. It makes sure that we aren't overburdening any one person in the organization when it comes to recruitment. It makes sure we have enough people for things such as conducting the interviews. It makes sure that we're not missing any steps. And perhaps with this recruitment template, it will, or the recruitment strategy template, it might give you a few more ideas on how to maybe start your recruitments or different steps to recruitment that you haven't done in the past. So again, wherever you see a red check mark, there'll be a tool in the toolkit that will be shared with you after the workshop. And for this slide, as I say, a recruitment strategy template. Yes, it takes time. There's a bit of administration in really sort of mapping out your strategy. But without a strategy, where are we headed? We're just, accepting resumes and, are we properly screening? Are we doing all the right steps? And again, I will cover all of those as we go through today. Other best practice areas I want to cover, obviously starting with the job description, advertising, interview questions in all ways, shapes, and forms. Want to cover those. Reference checks, and then the onboarding piece. And then a little bit more on retention strategy. So when we talk about working well, what does that mean? And as I said, folks, everything we're talking about absolutely applies to volunteer attraction and retention as well. So with the next slide, you guys, I want to look at the job description. So as I've already noted, when you are moving into a new competition, don't just automatically assume the job description is current, valid, like really examine it, a careful read to make sure that it actually is reflecting what the job is, what it's required to do. There's a couple of different organizations recently I've been involved with where they've had some challenges on the recruitment side, and it's like, well, okay, what's the cause? So we're digging in to try and, see what the challenge is. Well, their job description is an accurate articulation of what that position would do, but due to the circumstances in the organization, so for example, it could be an employment facilitator, which is one of the examples I'm going to use later. So yes, the individual coming into the organization is absolutely qualified to do everything in the job description, but the current environment in the organization is that, oh, we normally have 6 employment facilitators, and right now we've got, 2 on, 1 on maternity leave, 1 on paternity leave. We've got someone away studying right now. So we're actually down 3 employment facilitators, and the workload is much more significant. So the job description is accurate. However, the advertisement did not articulate sort of the pace or the caseload that would be carried by that position. So again, it's not just the job description. We also want to think about what's going on in the organization. At minimum, we want to make sure we're reviewing job descriptions each and every time before we put that posting out. Is it accurate? Is it up to date? Have we adequately reflected education and experience required? Have we actually articulated those real desirous skill sets? Go back, have a look at, what employers said in 2018, 2020, 2021. Are any of those on your checklist? Are any of those in your job description? And if not, should they be? Has the dynamic in the environment changed? Whether that's working, in a modified manner, a hybrid manner, whether that's different systems, more reliance on new technologies, make sure the job description is accurate. So in the do's and don'ts, definitely want you to be specific. Use plain language, folks. So we're looking for plain, clear, or clearer language, taking out any redundancy, very simplistic language to articulate very accurately what the job is, and try to be concise. So, brevity is our friend. Try not to use jargons, abbreviations, vague terms. So, the position may do something like it will or it won't, it shall or it shall not, but it may do something. If anyone on this Zoom call or anywhere out there can explain to me other duties as assigned, I'd like to hear more. Do not use other duties as assigned. Talk about what the job needs to do. If there are other duties, identify them. Don't oversimplify the job either. So again, really make sure you've got the level of detail that's going to share exactly what this is going to look like. And ideally, folks, what we're looking to do is use that job description to write the job advertisement. I have been through organizational reviews where we're actually posting positions before job descriptions were finalized. It can work, but there's always some gaps to fill later. It's not ideal. So the ideal is to have the job description with everything that's sort of been identified complete, and then use that as a basis point from which to write the job advertisement. Other big pitfalls that I see within job descriptions, so keep these guidelines in mind. We are writing a job description for the job, not the person that's currently in the job. So especially as nonprofits, what do we need done? That is what the job should be. Facts about what the position needs to deliver, not judgments. The job as it is right now. So again, it really reinforces that need to go back, make sure that you're looking at job descriptions and refreshing them on a regular basis, certainly before you're advertising to fill a position. But I would also argue that we want to do a job description review, even for longer term employees. I actually build in job description review every 2 years in their work plan. So not in year 1, but in year 2, unless something significant changes. So think about that as well. And I'll talk about work plan development, but review of the job description every couple of years should sit in the work plan as well. And there are 6 main components that I would recommend for job descriptions. So I've outlined, I wanted to outline them for you. And the way I thought I would do this is take a very typical position. So I have selected, as I mentioned, an employment facilitator. So this would be a very typical employment facilitator, individuals that are working with clients or consumers to help them attach to the labor market. So it could be anything from, skills development, writing a resume, engaging with employers. This is the role. And in this first section, as I say, the job title itself, and all of that identifying information, including who the position reports to. So I just gave you a bit of an outline here, because sometimes what I find when I'm looking at job descriptions is there's a bit of a crossover between the job title and the occupation. So I just wanted to provide a bit of clarity there, whereby the job title, as noted, is a specific name used regarding a position or job. The occupation is a broader term regarding an activity carried out in exchange for payment. So for example, this position title is employment facilitator. The occupation that I'd be looking for typically to fill this position would be a social worker or someone in human justice type sector. Very often will be the right person for working with the individuals in this particular organization that are looking to enter or re-enter the labor market. Again, job title being specific, but the occupation could be broad. So again, as a social worker or an employment facilitator, I've even had rehabilitation therapists actually come on into this particular employment facilitator role because of the nature of the organization. So again, thinking about the job title versus the occupation itself. In the job description, oh, and sorry, folks, I just want to jump back here as well. When we talk about the job hierarchy, this is the idea that you want to show. So normally we just articulate, well, this is, the supervisor where the position reports. I'm not also opposed to having a bit of a org chart included, and it may not form part of the job description, but just in that package, again, just so it's a visual reminder, does that still look right? Have we had any changes in our organizational structure? So something we don't see often, but it's not a bad idea. For the job purpose, so again, the position summary. So we want sort of a high level overview. In this case, I've said that this particular position is responsible for assisting with a caseload of consumers, and they're going to help them move through labor market services, employment dimensions, with the goal of them building out a career action plan and obtaining a labor market attachment or obtaining employment. So again, position summary, high level. When we get into the job duties of the job description, that's where I start breaking out two things. So I want to look at what are the more detailed level of activities that are required. And I want to try to separate those from education, knowledge, skills, competencies. So really focusing in this case, I've given 4. I try to keep it 4 and 6, fairly high level categories where I'll break out the detail around what would be required. So case management, and here's some detail of what would be required. Facilitating workshops or classes, engaging with employers. So again, I try to keep it to 4 to 6 of a higher level statement and then build out the level of detail. Again, as I say, we want to be specific, but we don't want to oversimplify it. We want to make sure we still have all of that level of detail. And instead of saying other duties as required, I have said administration. So in that category of other things that could be or are required to complete this position completely, you will collect, record, update, and maintain confidential records, provide statistics, narrative case management reporting, and there could be other duties in promoting independent living philosophy within our community. So that could be participation at community events. Maybe we don't know what all of them are, but we're referencing it beyond just the other duties as required. So again, think about that level of detail. Section 4 around the qualifications, I do try to split qualifications and competencies and abilities. So for the education, just as a sample, I've identified a number of education achievements that would be, a good alignment for this type of position. Everything from the formal education, social work, education degree, other training relative to independent living in this case, and then all the way through to, reporting, administrative skills, use of software packages, and be specific if there are unique softwares that would be required, certain case management tools or others in this instance, if they are applicable, they would be included. So again, really being specific. So this would be the qualifications versus this idea of competencies and abilities. So this is where we more want to get into an examination of think about your behavioral questions, and I'll talk more about those in this session as well. How we're going to drive out the understanding of knowledge, skills, abilities, how we're going to drive out an understanding or give me, proven demonstration of managing a variety of tasks at the same time. So again, competencies and abilities, really looking at those individual strengths that are probably going to matter the most for the particular position. So in this case, for example, strong interpersonal and communication skills with demonstrated skill in establishing rapport with individuals. So demonstrated ability to engage, be approachable, create a calming environment or take tension away from an environment. So building that really comfortable rapport, because again, working with individuals who maybe haven't been attached to the labor market for a number of years and they're looking at reentry, they could have a lot of stress and apprehension. So we want somebody who can really demonstrate how they can build rapport with individuals. Demonstrated skill in motivating, stimulating people to effective action. So thinking carefully about the words that would support the competencies and abilities. And then the last section, folks, again, I find that this section sometimes is overlooked or skipped over. It maybe just doesn't have the detail that it should, to be able to talk about the work conditions. So again, for this organization, because everything they do is embedded in independent living philosophy, that is included as part of the operational model with a little bit of an articulation about what that means. In the work conditions, we have the blended work model. So we talk about it. Our team works in a blended in-office and virtual or remote model. So again, we've added that as part of the work conditions. Work ethic. So we have fun and we work hard. Again, is it defensible? Can we in an interview talk about, well, this is what we mean when we say we have fun. So this was, here's, go to our website. Here's photos of our last annual golf tournament, all-day golf tournament last September, for example. Enthusiastic and positive, or any other articulating words that really speak to the expectation of how this is what you can expect in our environment. This is how we work. Highly energetic individuals. In this case, bringing a huge amount of positive energy into this role is critical. So again, these are tough, heavy lifting positions, and having that energy and having that positive attitude and how that will really translate into the individuals that the employment facilitator is working with. So again, wanted to give you some examples, but think carefully about the work conditions. How can you articulate what that really looks like? It also can help shine a light on the areas that you're maybe looking to improve within the organization or within that corporate culture. So working conditions. So again, 6 major components of a job description. Folks, in your toolkit, I did not include a job description template. I do find that most organizations have their own variation. That being said, if you are finding that you're needing a bit of an outline, just reach out to me. I can share a couple of different job description templates that I use for senior executive positions, finance positions, administrative positions, or unique positions such as this one, an employment facilitator. So if you are looking for either a template or other examples, and the same is true on the volunteer side. So if you need a job description for, a volunteer management coordinator or certain volunteers in your organizations, chances are I have something I could share with you, and at minimum, a template that I could share with you. So I haven't included that one in our homework or our toolkit, but if it is of interest, please do reach out to me. So from here, folks, I want to next move into with a thorough job description, appropriate. We've brushed the dust off, we've updated it, we've thought about our organization itself. We've also thought about our enterprise environment, anything that's changed, the skill sets we're really looking for. Now being ready to advertise the position. So again, I've got a number of different outlines that I use when I'm putting together a job advertisement. For any of you that have used an online advertisement tool, you'll know that there are sections that are completed for job title, remote work or not remote work, salary ranges could also be included. There's a number of different ways, certainly, of approaching the job advertisement. I always like to hone in on key things, the name of the position itself, a little bit about the environment that we work in and how we work, a few of the key requirements, and then building out into some of those skill areas, so qualification and skill areas, while also not losing sight of some of those other pieces we've identified in the work conditions. So again, I'm not suggesting this is a full advertisement at all that would be going out into the marketplace at this time, but just the idea of sort of those core areas that you'd want to look at. I also recommend, go on to various job advertisement websites and just have a look. There's some pretty unique and kind of interesting ways that various nonprofits are advertising their positions. So looking at trying to draw out of the marketplace where it could be more difficult or where there is high demand. What sets your organization apart from other organizations? So there's a number of interesting approaches. I mean, for many of us in the nonprofit, it's not going to be new to you. As we've struggled over the years with, our grants, our core operating monies, if you have them, our finances have remained static, but, the cost of doing business has continued to increase. So it's made it very difficult often to increase salaries or look at salary ranges for positions. And many organizations have moved to an EDO model, an earned day off model, 1 day off every 2 weeks, a Monday or a Friday, or other flexible working conditions, or, just sort of different perks and benefits, if you will, for employees. I know with some of the organizations I work with, we have a couple of additional times of the year that we provide days off with pay. So we actually do a floating holiday, a floating paid day off. So think of a stat holiday, but not statutory. Paid day off, we add one to the July long weekend. Well, in fact, we let the staff vote on when they want it. So they can pick May, June, July, they can pick whenever they want. Last year, they selected a Friday after the new National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. It fell on a Thursday, and they picked that Friday is the day that they picked to have off. So they get 1 day that will extend a long weekend. And then many, as I'm sure with many of you, closing the office for a fixed period of time in and around the Christmas, New Year break. So sometime after, one of the Fridays leading up to Christmas, closing the office for an extended period. And for this one organization, we take, I think there's 3 days there that we actually pay staff that aren't statutory holidays. So it's a little bit of a bonus. We try to find unique ways, to do what we can do with our limited capacity and limited resources. So if you are doing something unique, if you offer free yoga lessons for your employees in the park at lunch, if you offer 1 or 2 days every year that they can volunteer, so they're paid for those days, but they can volunteer within the organization or with some other organization that's like-minded or connected to yours. There's so many unique ways that we can look at how are we different than others out there. So think about that. If there is anything that does apply to you, you may want to share that in your job advertisement. And as I say, spend a bit of time looking at some of these posting websites. There's some pretty cool ideas out there, unique ways that we can set ourselves apart from the others. And again, really look at bringing individuals into the organization where there is demand or high demand in the marketplace. Following the advertisement then, which will do a whole lot of other things, including talk about the day on which applications are being received up to, the form that they must be in, so emailed to, must include a cover letter, all those kinds of good things. Once we are through the advertisement piece, then we want to move into screening applications. I will tell you again, the same as with the recruitment strategy ahead of time that I often find absent in most organizations. The resume screening is the other one that I most often find is done in a very ad hoc manner. It's not that it's not done, it's just done in a very ad hoc manner. So there are a number of different ways that we can and should be looking at and screening resumes, cover letters. I don't know if any of you are receiving video applications. I've done that with some postings for some of my clients. Doing a phone screening, interview. We use different other tools, obviously, remotely to do assessments, on-site interviews, of course, virtual interviews, and then all the way through to our background checks and references. So we've got a number of best practices, of course, but it starts with screening resumes. And so I wanted to share with you, if you've never used a tool like this, and so many organizations I work with just haven't, I wanted to share one with you. And this is a tool that the template is included in the toolkit after the session today. And this is just simply, again, I'm just sort of leveraging, building on that employment facilitator position just for demonstration purposes. So this is the idea that we're putting in the name of the individual, contact information, email, and doing a first pass assessment. So for this resume screening tool, I put every single resume into this tool, unless it didn't meet a requirement. It wasn't received by the deadline or the cutoff, or if I've asked for a cover letter and they didn't submit it, or they're missing something significant. But otherwise, I try to run every single application, or unless it's just so far off the mark. Like I've advertised for a stakeholder engagement officer focusing in on website and communications, and I get somebody send me a resume for being a research officer, and there just isn't a fit. But otherwise, I try to get every resume logged in this manner. And if you look at the bottom of the screen, the columns have small numbers that collate with the numbering at the bottom of the screen. So in my evaluation to follow instructions, I'm looking at, did they send in a resume, cover letter, and did they do it by the application deadline? If they did, they're going to get 3 points. If the resume came in by the application deadline, but there was no cover letter, 2 points. You get the idea. You will build the criteria that makes sense for each and every position. So again, the requirements of the position, I have identified exactly when I go back to my job description. Okay, here's how we did the advertisement, bachelor degree, so on and so forth. Relevant work experience, focusing in on disability inclusion, employment support, facilitation, working in nonprofits. Again, you can customize at a very high level the touch points and a weighted system. And I'm not suggesting it would always be X number of points. Build that to suit yourself. Also build in anything that would be unique to your organization. So for this organization, I've said item number 4, person that self-identifies as an individual with disability or lived experience. Because of course, in our full job advertisement, we're talking about this. They would actually receive a few more points, up to 5 more points. Many organizations I work with, when we're saying that being bilingual is an asset, will assign 5 points if they are in fact bilingual. So extra points for very specific things. And again, you can customize that to your liking. So again, if you're not using a resume screening tool, I strongly suggest using one. And for that reason, I have included one in the toolkit for you. The next pieces that I want to move into then, and we'll tie this back, of course, to our idea of corporate culture and values, because we do want this infused all the way through every step of your retention or your recruitment strategy. Preparation for the interview. Again, taking the time to really think about the questions that you want to ask on the technical side, so technical related to the position, questions that are going to dig a little bit more into that emotional intelligence, thinking about behavioral based questions in particular, and then really trying to strike that best balance. Now, in your toolkit, this is a huge area, you guys, of examination when we talk about building out the appropriate questions for an interview guide. So what I've done is really identified a number of areas that you may want to examine, and I've put together questions that you potentially could be asking. And that document, so I've referred to it as examples of value-based interview questions. That document is going to be in your toolkit. It's a PDF, and I think it's around 7 pages long. So I've gone through and just to give you a sense of the values that I've looked at and how I built out the questions. So the values that are in this document include value-based questions in the areas of compassion, collaboration. I've also included innovation, responsibility, trust, diversity, integrity, and quality. So, and that's, I mean, this is just a portion of the different values and associated questions that I might use, but I wanted to give you a really good, strong sampling. So you're going to see that document. And again, technical skills are technical skills. The hard skills are the hard skills. You can, you know how to use Microsoft Word in the Office suite, or you don't. That may not be a bad thing. Anybody can, you know, pretty much learn anything, but it's a hard skill. You have it or you don't. It's the emotional intelligence, really looking at social skills, self-control, engagement, compassion, empathy, again, motivation, innovation, responsibility, trust, some of those areas. And again, very often we know that we want to examine those areas, but how do we get there? So what I have done, as I say, for each of those values, I've identified a leading question, actually several leading questions, and then I've identified follow-up questions, and I've also provided you with key criteria that you'd be looking for. So if you've never spent a lot of time looking at this type of assessment of emotional intelligence and using behavioral-based questions, this will give you just a really, really excellent start. So again, have a look at that after the session today. And as always, happy to answer questions, but I think it'll give you a good start because it's sort of, you know, here's the area we're examining, you know, we're examining empathy. Here's the type of questions we can ask. Here's the leading questions. Here's the follow-up questions and criteria that would sort of signal to you that you're seeing what you're looking for relative to that particular aspect of value or that particular aspect of emotional intelligence. So again, that item is in your homework. It really fits nicely and very well with this idea of, I call it sort of the power of storytelling. So when we're asking these behavioral questions, and the idea is that we want to focus on what a person has done in the past, the success that they have enjoyed as a result. The idea that I also want to talk about when things didn't go so well. So particularly on the project management side, every time I'm hiring a project manager or somebody to run a new program or a project that's going to morph into a program, I always want to hear about something that didn't go so well. So tell me about a time a project or a program didn't go the way you thought it ought to. We can garner much from that. And again, what we're looking for is, oh, here's what didn't go well. Here's, you know, what we're looking for is here's what I learned from that and how it won't happen again. So creating an environment for storytelling. So again, we could talk at length about this, but there is one really fantastic technique that is easy to learn, easy to execute, and will very often get you into a place where you're better able to assess individuals through these types of behavioral questions. So it's referred to as the STAR technique. So the acronym simply stands for situation, task, result, and action. So the idea is that describing the situation or an event that an individual was in. So again, we would ask a leading question, you know, tell me about a time where, you know, you were most proud of your individual work effort. So if we're looking at assessing, you know, self-drive or task, you know, self-management, self guidance in carrying out tasks without direct authority or supervision, as an example. And then the next piece, task, explain the task that you had to complete, what was the result, and describe the specific actions that you took to get there. And you can use this STAR technique for almost any type of situational questions, with the intent to really understand how a person reacts in certain contexts or certain situations. So again, the idea of creating an environment where we can really harness the power of storytelling and what we're hearing from individuals. So a couple of behavioral question components to be mindful of, and then how we're going to frame this, or how we're going to capture this information. So again, folks, if you already have an interview tool that you're using, just, have a look at the one in the toolkit that I'm sharing with you. I've just pulled a couple of pages, just an excerpt for pure demonstration purposes, just to highlight the importance of utilizing some type of a rating system. So whether it's points or percentages or stars or whatever you want to use, the idea that we want to have some type of, unbiased rating system that we can use for each candidate that we're going to interview. Again, always recommend 2 individuals conducting the interview or more could be appropriate, but a minimum of 2. And the idea is that each individual that is interviewing is going to be completing this form. So it's not just one person. Ideally, this would be 2 or 3 individuals who will take turn answering questions, who will all be making notes, and who each will individually be giving their own perception or rating on each of the categories. So with this scoring mechanism in mind, I just wanted to give you a couple of examples. Here we used a behavior question where we said, tell us about your background, work experience, knowledge, skills, and attributes that you would bring to this role that would help make you successful. So again, each one of the individuals that are doing the interview or asking the interview question are going to also be completing this form. And again, this is just a snapshot. I've just given the first couple of questions. And then the next page just jumps right to the end of this document. Again, I've included this template in the follow-up pieces. Some final questions, candidate enthusiasm, overall impression and recommendation, final comments and recommendation for this candidate. So once all of the questions are complete and rated, they are totaled up, and then we note the interviewer's name at the bottom. And of course, then we look and compare how the totals look for each of the individuals that conducted the interview. And again, I like to, if at all possible, build enough time in between your interviews so you can work with the other individuals that are doing the interviews with you and have a little bit of that time at the end to compare notes and to actually complete your evaluation, summarize and total, and then have a bit of a discussion. It's always best to do this, obviously, when things are fresh. So we don't want to leave it to the next day, or you don't want to conduct 6 interviews in a day and have a pile of paperwork and you haven't gone through and done your ratings or totaled up. So again, make sure you build in enough time to do that, ideally after each and every candidate while it's fresh. A few other things to think about, sort of the top tips, folks, to hire the right candidate. Again, think about those skills. What are the top skills in your organization or through your lens? It may be around adaptability, asking questions, that natural curiosity we talked about, workflow management. I've just included sort of the top 10 when I think about what mostly am I seeing on a consistent basis in the nonprofit sector. Team players, efficient use of resources. We're constantly trying to do more with less or with the same. Relationship management, owning mistakes, enjoy learning, and again, sort of feel for the fit of the individual within the organization. So again, these were just a few, that alignment to values. So these were just a few that really stood out with most of the work that I do in most of the nonprofit sectors, what other senior managers are talking about, what really matters, how highly adaptive is an individual, because of the pace of information coming to us, changes in how we're doing things, starting new programs, for example. So is adaptability something that really stands out? Asking questions, not struggling. Again, workflow management, and to some degree, customize as you would see fit to your organization, but these ones tend to flesh out as the top 10 for nonprofits. And I guess the only other thing I wanted to touch base on regarding interviews was this idea of how to become a better interviewer or a good interviewer. No substitute for practice. A job hunter themselves will not be able to excel, in an interview if they don't practice. The same thing is true for the person conducting the interview. So again, it's really more of an art than a science, folks. Being authentic, being genuine, really avoiding any of the pitfalls around, and if you're unsure, there are lots of resources I can point you to, questions that would be inappropriate to ask. So if you're not sure about what is legally allowable for questions to ask or not, you can just shoot me an email and I can have a separate sort of conversation or send you some other additional resources. We just don't want to see folks asking any questions that they shouldn't. Other pitfalls, don't fail to really be clear in defining the requirements of the role. So again, being very authentic and genuine, here's what the position looks like. Don't forget to create that scorecard for the interview. If we're going to create the environment for the power of storytelling, we also have to really cultivate our listening skills. So we have to make sure that we're not failing to listen and really hear. And again, another pitfall, don't fail to debrief after the interview. Make sure you build in that time. And again, practice makes perfect. The more opportunity you have to conduct interviews, the better you're going to get at it. But again, the pressure is taken off of the interviewer when you have a solid understanding of the job. That job description is up to date. The advertisement was an accurate articulation of what you're looking for, and you've really invested the time in building out, selecting the values that matter, the leading questions, and the follow-up questions that make sense for that position. When you're that well prepared, it's very easy to start honing those interview skills and getting quite proficient at it, and really being able to engage in an authentic way. So with that in place, folks, a couple of other items I want to talk about just relative to reference checks. The idea of a bit of an outline, how to conduct them, making sure you're doing the checks that are appropriate for your organization, your sector, specific requirements that unique requirements that you may have. So criminal record check is not uncommon. Vulnerable sector check for some organizations, not uncommon. Other things that you would be looking into, driving, for example, is required for the position, whether or not your organization chooses to verify education, so on and so forth. And of course, the most important, and don't overlook it, doing the actual reference checks themselves. So again, I find most nonprofits have a really solid handle on the CRCs, vulnerable sector, anything that's specific to their environment. If they're looking for certain certifications, training, for example, maintaining certifications in different types of things, whether it's first aid or different levels of health and wellness training, for example. So I find that most organizations are pretty solid there. With reference checks, as I say, don't just gather them from the individuals that you want to potentially consider for the role. Make sure to check them. So again, typically this is once you're shortlisted down, you've screened down, you've got maybe those top 2 or 3 individuals. Again, in building out reference check questions. There's a number of different ways to approach this. I've given you just a very short little overview here. And again, I wanted to expand on that a little bit further. So in the toolkit, I've actually included a complete reference check set of questions in different categories and with some script for you too. So top questions to ask are included. And I would also encourage you, I am finding that in doing reference checks, individuals that are being listed are much more apt to return an email and answer questions than to schedule a phone call or a Zoom. I don't know if it actually takes any less time to complete an email and send it back, answer the questions, but I feel like the perception is. So when I'm doing reference checks, I will very often, and I actually ask for it, references with email addresses. I'll often do reference checks by email, and I find that I'm getting a way better success rate and a quicker response rate than making a phone call. So something you may want to think about. Again, if you're looking for additional questions, you probably, again, have some of your own that you use. And here are just some of those best practices. And as I say, in the homework, we've got a really good outline for you. So lots of potential questions, top best practice questions to be asking. The next piece, folks, that I want to cover, just as I see we are moving into the last sort of 20 minutes of our time together, with our orientation and onboarding, as I say, there are a number of best practices that take us beyond day one or just that first week of employment. I would argue that the best onboarding, welcoming, bringing an individual into the organization, really starting early and consistently to make that person feel like they're part of that corporate culture, to really engage them and immerse them in the organization, will actually start even ahead of their first day. So I do recommend having a checklist before the first day and then on the first day of work or volunteer engagement. Again, there's a number of items that you'll see within this checklist, and more specifically, I've built out a checklist for the first few weeks. So the things that you should be thinking about. Again, with these particular checklists, I haven't included, I have several of them for the first day, the first few days, the first week, each week within the first month, and then all the way through to the 12-month mark. So these are just samples, folks, and I have not included these checklists in the toolkit, but if you're interested, let me know. I'm happy to share the more detailed and in chronological order. I'm happy to do that. Again, we know onboarding is important. We want to avoid that 22% of employees, leaving within the first 45 days, 40% of senior executives in the first 18 months. So again, the idea of onboarding, that it takes us all the way through to at least that 1 year mark. One of the key milestones in that onboarding, I would suggest, is in the first month. And this is starting to set the stage for some initial goals and some initial objectives. This doesn't take the place of a work plan, an annual work plan, which I'll share with you next. But it just starts to set out some early opportunities for early wins. And again, remember that golden thread where every individual in the organization understands how what they do every day is supporting that strategic direction, the mission of the organization. The sooner we can get that alignment and have those new individuals, staff or volunteers, experiencing some wins, that's going to start to solidify and embed them within the corporate culture. They're not an outsider viewing it, they're part of it. So we want to create that as quickly as possible. So again, some advice around doing this type of work within that first month. That would be a key milestone. The other key milestone is building out a work plan. And again, this should be done as soon as possible in that first month, no later than the first 3 months, where we're actually building out the remainder of the fiscal year and creating that opportunity for mid-year review and of course, new work plan at the beginning of the next fiscal year. So the one that I've included for you here, it's 2 pages, the work plan with capacity to do the mid-year review and the year-end review, which you'll see on the second page. And again, I have included this template in your toolkit. I do find that many organizations have multiple different approaches to how they're building out their work plans. Lots of times it won't be consistent. So you'll have a program manager that has a tool they like. You know, you might have another individual that has a tool that they like. If you're looking for a very easy to use and standard approach in your organization, this work plan works incredibly well if you have only volunteers, if you've got 3 staff, or if you have 31 staff. It works very well. So again, scalable. And the tool that I've included for you is an actual working template. So you can delete columns, add sections as you see fit. So again, we don't want to skip that step. Within the first year of onboarding, again, regular check-ins, you will be mindful of this if you have that work plan in place. Again, in the first year, I'll build in more checkpoints. Once we get past 12 months, then it's sort of a mid-year check-in and end-of-year check-in. So again, just be mindful of those approaches within that first year. Onboarding isn't a day, it isn't a week. We really want to be mindful and really plan for milestone check-ins within that first year. Other helpful tips, again, beginning prior to day 1, as I say, onboarding, we often look at it as that day, that first day. Get organized ahead of time. So sort of use that pre-checklist. Remember, first impressions matter. So taking the time to do introductions, make sure that the individual very quickly can start to have a sense of belonging, getting to know names, getting to know faces, getting to know programs, having your checklists, having your plans ready, and going through those with the individual. Here's what our plan is over the next 3 months. Here's the time that, I've committed to doing these things with you, and then we're going to sit down once a month, and here's what we're going to do by the end of the second month. We're going to have your work plan. By the end of the first month, we're going to make sure you're involved in a couple of really cool initiatives. So again, sort of setting that stage. Other areas of focus that make sense, folks, this whole idea of relative to retention. So you're not necessarily going to do this overnight. Start small. The idea of really looking at the organization's values. Consider your values. See if you can find your values in the list of questions that I've put forward as the behavioral questions and the follow-up questions. If you're not seeing something that aligns, let me know. There are ways that we can really start early. Retention we think about as retrospective. So this idea of retention, if we think of it as proactive, what can we do to set the stage for success? It will start long before that job is ever advertised. Other areas that we can focus on once individuals are in the organization, the support, having the work plan, having the mid-year check-in. This isn't a report card. This is an opportunity for dialogue. Identifying professional development opportunities, any other commitments to the wellness of the employee. So having that regular opportunity and dialogue with the supervisor, engaging new individuals into the fun activities that the organization does as well. And don't be hard on yourself. This isn't going to happen overnight. It may be incremental steps. You may need to start with, refreshing all job descriptions, putting work plans in place for employees. Like, it can start one step at a time. All of that will support the overarching corporate culture. So again, don't be hard on yourselves. It's about just getting the ball moving in the right direction and sort of the micro steps that it takes to get there. Other things related to employee retention strategies. Again, when we talk about creating a work environment, what are we offering that no one else is? How can we promote our culture, our corporate culture, whether it's in our marketing materials, on our website, how the language you use when we post our jobs, how it's reflected in your social media presence, for example. So again, thinking about, well, what would it look like if this is one of the best places to work or one of the best workplaces? What else do we do? that sets us apart from others. Everything, you know, free snacks in your boardroom, implementing more of a casual, you know, approach to work day, which I think many organizations have done over the years. Are there other things that we can do that are just unique? On Fridays, we take an hour and a half lunch. You know, we have Shop Local Wednesdays and we bring lunch in for whoever wants to participate. You know, take a longer lunch break and we're going to go for, you know, have a health break for half an hour. Everybody goes for a walk or some other casual activity. So again, this whole idea of really working well will support your overarching retention strategies. There are a couple of statistics. I actually just read a report this morning before this workshop. It came from the Sarasota Institute, and it says in this most recent survey, more than 50% of an employee's job satisfaction can be directly related to the health of the relationship with their direct supervisor. So 50% make that time for staff to be able to engage with their direct supervisor on a regular basis. And the study also noted 56% of employees reported that their organization failed to show concern, failed to treat them fairly, failed to gain their trust, and only 24% reported that they were loyal. And this was an organization where the questions were related to values and corporate culture. So everything such as sharing information, communicating with employees, that type of thing, which, as I say, it really takes us full circle. You know, we started with all the reasons why, reduced absenteeism and illness, you know, improved job satisfaction, mental well-being, motivated, reduced turnover, all of those things that we would see absolutely through implementing some of these strategies. And as I say, sort of on that employee wellness side, ask the question, do an annual survey. If you are looking for questions to include in your annual survey, reach out to me. I have different databases of questions that I use and ones that I recommend that you ask every year so you can start to track your results and are you moving the marker? The one example I gave you here, overall, I feel valued and satisfied as an employee of this organization. So you can see what the results were in 2018. And then, you know, we set some goals around, well, where do we want that to be within the management team? And what can we do to get there? So we did sort of a gap analysis, strategic gap analysis. We identified, we also asked some other questions in the employee survey. And as you can see, by 2019, we had moved the marker a little bit. We were able to bump up that overall feeling of being valued and satisfied. And again, if you are looking for questions or how to put together an employee survey, I am happy to share some of the different surveys or questions in different surveys that I have used in the past that I continue to use. Questions I recommend you ask every year, and then questions that you might just want to ask that are more relevant to a specific point in time. So again, if you're at all interested, let me know. There are countless different mechanisms out there now to conduct completely anonymous surveys. So your employees, you know, can be assured that they wouldn't be identified as to who they are. Other ways that we can get employee feedback in smaller organizations. I don't recommend surveys in smaller organizations, but questions that can be asked as part of a bit of a group. So it's a bit of a group conversation facilitated model of engaging employees. And it's a little bit of a different approach in smaller organizations. So if that more applies to you, you can let me know. And again, I'm happy to give you sort of a few tips and tricks around how to facilitate bringing all of the employees together and trying to draw out these very same things: levels of satisfaction, areas of interest, desires, what can we do differently, how they feel about communication, various aspects of their employment. So again, happy to help with that if it applies to you. And as one of our authors, Ken Blanchard. So Ken Blanchard, you may be familiar with the Blanchard-Hershey model, which simply talks about the relationship we have with employees and then how much do we have to coach them, or once they're up and running in their role, When can we delegate to them? So the Blanchard-Hershey model is a bit of a matrix that talks about how much direction do we have to give staff, and then when can we start backing it off, and then when can we delegate? So give the work, trust that it's going to be done, sort of get out of the way, if you will. So one of the quotes from Ken Blanchard, who created this Blanchard-Hershey model of how direct do we have to be with a new hire or new volunteer, also writes, hire smart people, train them properly, and then get out of their way. So I think it couldn't be better stated when we talk about, we even saw it with Google, we get away from that micromanagement. We trust, we bring in good people, with skilled people, we make sure that we're making the investment in recruitment and retention. We pay attention to our corporate values, and we look for individuals that are aligned with our values. And I can tell you folks, there are, I did interviews recently. I had 3 positions to fill for one of my clients, and we used the resume screening tool. We screened, we interviewed more people than we intended to, because there were so many high ratings, and some of the highest rated individuals in that screening mechanism, due to formal education and other aspects, they actually interviewed much lower than individuals that had less formal education, more lived experience, and just simply had an attachment, to the values of the organization. And through those behavioral questions, we were really able to drive out and see that level of, sort of commitment, or examine individuals' level of commitment, individuals' level of trust, responsibility, work ethic. So again, yes, it takes time. Yes, it is a bit of work, you guys. There's no doubt about it. But just look at those initial statistics where we saw 3 times the annual salary can be the potential financial impact when we're looking at turnover. It is worth our time, to get off the hamster wheel and not just repurpose everything we have, but really be mindful of every aspect of job description, advertisement, creating a strategy up front, and seeing it all the way through. Again, don't lose sight of that corporate culture and the values component. And again, I do deliver, I'm just going to stop sharing my screen, folks. I know we only have a few minutes left here, and I do want to answer any questions if there are any. I just wanted to say I deliver a class at the University of Regina, and it is entitled Effective Recruitment and Retention. Just to give you guys an idea, that's a 2-day class. So this is really the Cole's Notes version of some of those best practices. So again, if there are any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. And again, you're not limited to just now. I'm always happy to engage outside of the session. And based on our last couple of workshops, I had lots of folks emailing me and reaching out, which is just fantastic. So again, don't feel that you're limited to the 7 minutes that we have left here before the end of this workshop. So with that, I have not, Lynn, at all been paying attention to the chat. If there are questions, or folks wanted to put up their hand or turn on their audio video, I'm more than pleased to answer any questions that folks might have.
I don't see any questions in the chat, Sherry, but
yeah. So I had one direct, give me one moment here, Lynn. I'm just going to scroll all the way up to make sure I'm not missing any other direct messages. So one of the direct messages, what is your suggestion if the reason for employees leaving is salary, benefits, and pensions? I think our organization does very well with all the other reasons why employees leave. This is such a great question, you guys. So I want you to think about this for a minute. We know, every one of us working in nonprofit knows the challenge of limited resources, particularly financial resources, particularly core operating grants or other core funding streams. Plus, we've been hit with the inability to do our normal fundraising events over the last couple of years. Organizations are in a tough spot. We are not the organizations that are going to be able to offer salary increases, very often not even benefits or pensions. And what I say to you is this: think about the idea of being an incubator organization. So think about the idea that we want to be an employer of choice, but we also want to be known as where individuals come, maybe early in their careers, early after their educational journey is kind of coming to an end and they're starting to look at the labor market. What about being an incubator organization? So what about saying, we're bringing individuals in, we're hiring, but knowing within your strategic operating model, you're not going to be able to provide benefits or pensions. So maybe it's about a little bit better of an entry-level salary, get those individuals in. Maybe you only get 2 or 3 years with them. If you can, a little bit higher maybe than what the competition has for entry-level position, get them in knowing that you're only going to have them for 2 or 3 years. They're not going to stay for 10 years. You can't offer unless something magical happens. What about the idea of being an incubator organization and being known for it? So all of a sudden, the individuals that are coming into this organization, we're absolutely known for taking brand new graduates, for example, honing and crafting and creating skill and practical experience. And we are actually generating really fantastic employees that will go on to work in other organizations. That can be one strategy. And if you are at all going to think about that approach, which I think is a very valid approach, because there's just a point where you don't have the money for the benefits or the pension. Most of us don't, quite honestly, for the various nonprofits. But what about being known as that? Oh, that organization really generates some pretty fantastic. I'd hire somebody that came from that organization. You know what I'm saying? Maybe it's that. And if you are going to go down that road, it actually changes a few things in your operations. It actually changes a few things in your strategic plan as well, under strategic goals, but it'll also change things within your operations, because you equally want to be mindful of how much money are you going to invest. So when you think about professional development, you may still want to do some. There's different approaches that we take when we're looking to retain an employee for a longer duration. I throw that out there as an idea. It's one strategy, because it's without the money coming in the door and being able to pay more or offer benefits. What else can you do? You can be known as, and then it, again, is that flywheel effect. Graduates coming out, it's like, oh, I want to work there. That's where I want to start my career. Just a suggestion. I hope that helps. There's another direct message, another really great question. As a relatively young director, I find that there seems to be a generational gap between members of our leadership team with regard to management style of our respective employees. How can we bridge the gap between micromanagement and autonomy and building capacity? That is such an excellent question. We may have to look at that, Lynn, for the future workshop series. I actually deliver a webinar called The Generational Divide, and we look at all of the generations, generally speaking, their attributes and their approach to work and their work ethics and beliefs, whether it's boomers, XY, all the way through. That can give some insight, particularly for younger directors, because if you do have a more seasoned board of directors, those generational gaps are going to be exacerbated. So for example, if you have a more seasoned board of directors that comes from a time and place where good work ethic meant, a warm bum in a chair, and now we're in a work environment that it's about outcomes. It's not about outputs. It's not about 8 hours in a chair every day. It's about outcomes. How are we making a difference? I don't care if you've got your toes in the sand in Mexico and you're working remotely, or your backyard, or you're taking your daughter dance classes and cutting the grass, and you're managing your whole life. As long as you're getting your work done, it's a different type of work environment that could be incomprehensible to to individuals that are more seasoned, perhaps in a different place and time relative to work. So that idea of generational divide, what can we do to break it down? What can help is certainly creating an understanding amongst all generations. So the idea, and there's actually some pretty cool activities, little kind of almost icebreaker, whatever activities that can be done that can help individuals really understand not just themselves, but to better understand those around them. So for that younger director, you could maybe better understand, this is what the traditional work ethic, this is why this board member, for example, thinks that it has to be done this way. Whereas that more seasoned board member, if they understand the attributes of a different generation relative to, for example, reliance and preference on technology. Some of our younger generations have high philanthropy. So where do we understand each other? And then we can start looking at where we have commonality, and where we have commonality and individuals can find that common ground, that will start breaking down some of those barriers. So there's a lot of strategy around it. Lynn, maybe I'll talk to you offline. That could be a potential generational divide workshop that might, it's been very popular for this very reason, because we do have multiple different generations, often working within nonprofits. So again, bridging some of those gaps, if you will, through that examination and creating a common understanding can go a long way as one strategy. I hope that helps.
Well, it looks, unless, are there any other questions directly to you, Sherry? If not, we look like my clock says 12:01. And
Yeah.
you've certainly given us a lot of food for thought in a short period of time. And I know many of you are going to be looking forward to my email later this afternoon with these toolkits, which I think are very practical, and which on behalf of everyone, Sherry would like to graciously thank you for that, because this allows everybody to just take what you've told us and directly put it into action. So your approach to facilitating these workshops is greatly appreciated. I know many people have told me that they, these takeaways and your willingness to kind of answer questions after is just so appreciated.
Oh, of course. And honestly, Lynn, my pleasure. I say it all the time. I've dedicated the last 15, coming on 20 years now in my career after I left government to work exclusively in nonprofits. And I've never had more satisfying work and any opportunity to give back. And I always say, I wish I had some of these tools when I was brand new in nonprofit, or, a brand new executive director. And so I'm more than happy to give back. And it's not just the ideas, but the actual tools. So that's why I like to always make sure we've got some tools so folks can, straight away start applying some of these techniques and ideas, and hopefully fill some gaps if they don't have the tools already in their organization. So no, my absolute pleasure. Thanks so much. And it was so great seeing so many frequent flyers and plus new folks every session too. So it's been a great workshop series. Awesome.